The dashboard clock blinked 2:13 a.m. as I pulled into the deserted rest stop. I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles, and the isolation was starting to get to me. Little did I know my solitude was about to be shattered in the most unsettling way possible. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, hauling a load of electronics from Reno to Denver. My eyes were gritty with fatigue, and my back ached from hours in the driver's seat. This rest stop was my last chance to grab a quick nap before pushing through to my destination. As I maneuvered my rig into one of the oversized parking spots, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No crickets chirping, no distant traffic noise, just the low rumble of my idling engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. The silence seemed to press in on me from all sides. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The rest stop was barely lit, just a couple of flickering sodium lamps casting sickly yellow pools of light near the restroom building. Beyond that, inky blackness swallowed up the picnic area and the edges of the parking lot. With a groan, I heaved myself out of the cab. My boots hit the ground with a thud that seemed too loud in the stillness. I stretched, feeling my vertebrae pop as I worked out the kinks. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine trees and diesel fuel. I made my way to the restroom, my footsteps echoing in the empty lot. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lighting made me squint. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to wake myself up enough to make it through the next few hours. As I dried off with a handful of paper towels, I caught my reflection in the mirror bloodshot eyes, 2-day stubble, and deep lines of exhaustion etched around my mouth. I looked every bit as worn out as I felt. Back outside, I paused to dig a protein bar out of my jacket pocket. As I was unwrapping it, movement at the edge of my vision made me freeze. I squinted into the darkness, heart suddenly pounding. There, just at the edge of the light, a pale shape was moving towards me. As it got closer, I could make out a woman. She was wearing a light-colored dress that fluttered around her legs as she walked. Her long hair whipped in a breeze I couldn't feel. Something about her gait seemed off, kind of halting and uneven. I took an involuntary step back as she entered the circle of light cast by the nearest lamp. Her face came into view and I sucked in a sharp breath. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and might have been pretty if not for the wild, desperate look in her eyes. There was a smear of something dark across one cheek that looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking. "Please, I need help." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away. But I couldn't just leave her here if she was really in trouble. I stood my ground as she hurried towards me, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you hurt?" She came to a stop a few feet away from me, swaying slightly. Up close, I could see that her dress was torn and dirty. Her feet were bare and covered in scratches. "My car," she said, gesturing vaguely towards the darkness beyond the parking lot. "It broke down about a mile back. I've been walking for hours trying to find help." I frowned, glancing in the direction she had indicated. "A mile back? But there's nothing out there for at least 20 miles in either direction. I would have seen your car when I drove in." A flicker of something passed across her face. It was gone so quickly I thought I must have imagined it. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering. I'm not sure exactly how far. Everything looks different in the dark. Please, I just need a ride to the next town. I have to get home." Warning bells were going off in my head. Her story wasn't adding up, and there was something about her demeanor that felt off. But it was the middle of the night, and she clearly needed help of some kind. I couldn't just abandon her here. "Okay," I said slowly. "I can give you a ride to the next town. It's about 30 miles up the road. We can call for a tow truck from there to go back for your car." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." I nodded towards my truck. "Let me just grab my phone from the cab and we can get going." As I turned to walk away, I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. I glanced back to see a look of panic flash across the woman's face. "No," she blurted out. "I mean, please don't leave me alone out here. Can I wait in the truck while you get your phone?" I hesitated. Every trucker knows the golden rule: never let a stranger into your cab when you're not there. But she looked so frightened and fragile, standing there in her torn dress. What was I supposed to do, make her wait out here in the dark? All right, I said finally. Come on. I led her over to my rig, uncomfortably aware of her presence at my back. When we reached the passenger side, I unlocked the door and gestured for her to climb up. She did so awkwardly, as if she wasn't used to getting into a big truck. Once she was settled, I walked around to the driver's side and hauled myself up into the seat. I could feel her eyes on me as I reached for my phone in the center console. I'm John, by the way, I said, trying to break the tension. There was a beat of silence before she responded. Emily, she murmured. I nodded, pulling up the map on my phone. Okay, Emily. Looks like the nearest town is Cedar Grove. We should be there in about 30 minutes. We can get you some help there. I looked over at her, expecting to see relief. Instead, her face had gone blank, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. A chill ran down my spine. Emily, I prompted. Did you hear me? We'll be there soon. She turned to look at me, and I had to suppress a shudder. Her eyes seemed wrong somehow. Too wide, too bright in the dim cab. We can't go to Cedar Grove, she said flatly. I blinked in confusion. What? Why not? It's not safe there. Her voice had taken on a monotone quality that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. We need to go the other way. Alarm bells were clanging in my head now. I reached for the door handle, intending to get out and put some distance between us. Look, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe we should... Her hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. We have to go, she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. They'll find me if we don't leave now. I tried to pull away, but her fingers dug in painfully. Who? I demanded. Who's going to find you? She leaned in close, her eyes fever bright. The ones who did this to me, she whispered. It was then that I noticed the smell, a sickly sweet odor of decay that hadn't been there before. I recoiled, my back pressed against the door. Emily's face contorted into a rictus grin, far too wide for her delicate features. Don't you want to help me, John? She asked, her voice distorting into something inhuman. I thought you were going to save me. Terror gripped me as I scrabbled for the door handle. I practically fell out of the cab in my haste to escape, hitting the gravel hard. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and ran for the restroom building. It was the only structure around, the only possible shelter. I risked a glance over my shoulder as I ran. Emily, or whatever she really was climbing down from the cab with unnatural grace. In the harsh glare of the truck's headlights, I could see that her dress was rotting off her body, revealing glimpses of gray, mottled flesh underneath. I slammed into the restroom door, fumbling with trembling hands to lock it behind me. The fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed as I pressed my back against the far wall, gasping for breath. For a long moment, there was only silence broken by my ragged breathing. Then a soft scratch at the door. Another. The handle jiggled. John, Emily's voice sing-songed from the other side. It no longer sounded even remotely human. Don't you want to help me get home? We can go together. It's such a lovely drive at night. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for this nightmare to end. The scratching at the door grew more insistent, accompanied by a low, guttural growling. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging me into total darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard the distinct sound of the lock turning. As the door began to creak open, admitting a sliver of sickly yellow light, I realized with horror that my momentary act of kindness might have doomed me. In the back of my mind, a trucker's age-old maxim echoed mockingly, "No good deed goes unpunished on the midnight road." Story 2. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the highway into a treacherous river of black asphalt. I squinted through the windshield, my wipers working overtime but barely keeping up. That's when I saw him. A lone figure on the roadside, thumb out, hoping for a miracle in this downpour. I'm not usually one to pick up hitchhikers. My mom's voice echoed in my head, warning me about the dangers of letting strangers into my car. But something about the scene tugged at my conscience. It was nearly midnight, and we were miles from the nearest town. I couldn't just leave someone out here in this weather. I eased onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. The figure approached, hunched against the wind and rain. As he got closer, I could make out more details. A man, probably in his 30s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. He was wearing jeans and a light jacket that looked soaked through. I leaned over and popped open the passenger door. "Hop in!" I called out, having to raise my voice over the storm. He slid into the seat, bringing a gust of cold, damp air with him. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I didn't think anyone would stop." "I couldn't leave you out there in this," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he said vaguely. "There's an exit in about 20 miles. I can get off there." I nodded, focusing on the road ahead. The rain hadn't let up, and I had to concentrate to keep us on track. After a few moments of silence, I glanced over at my passenger, intending to make some small talk to pass the time. That's when I noticed something odd. Despite having been out in the pouring rain, his clothes looked dry, not just damp, but bone dry, as if he'd just pulled them from a warm dryer. I blinked, sure I must be seeing things in the dim light of the dashboard. "So, what brings you out here on a night like this?" I asked, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping up my spine. He turned to look at me, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes in the flash of a passing car's headlights. They seemed to glint with an unnatural brightness. "Car broke down," he said flatly. "Had to start walking." "That's rough," I sympathized, though something about his story didn't quite add up. I hadn't seen any broken down vehicles on the side of the road. But then again, visibility was pretty bad. Maybe I'd missed it. We lapsed into silence again, the only sounds the pounding of rain on the roof and the steady swish of the wipers. I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, a sense of unease growing with each passing mile. The hitchhiker began to fidget in his seat, his movements becoming more agitated as we drove. He kept checking the mile markers, muttering under his breath. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but his tone was urgent, almost frantic. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He snapped his head toward me, and this time I was sure his eyes were too bright, almost glowing in the darkness of the car. "We need to take the next exit," he said, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. I frowned, confused. "I thought you said your exit was in 20 miles? Plans change," he growled. "Take the next exit. Now." My heart began to race. Something was very, very wrong here. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that. I can drop you off at the exit we agreed on, or I can let you out here if you prefer." His reaction was immediate and terrifying. He lunged across the center console, grabbing for the steering wheel. I said, "Take the exit," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. I jerked away, struggling to maintain control of the car as we swerved on the slick road. "What are you doing?" I screamed, terror coursing through me. "Stop it!" But he wouldn't stop. He kept trying to wrench the wheel from my grasp, his strength seemingly inhuman. The car fishtailed, and I caught glimpses of oncoming headlights through the spray. We were going to crash if I couldn't regain control. In desperation, I slammed on the brakes. The car hydroplaned, spinning across the lanes. I saw the guardrail approaching in a sickening blur of motion. Then came the impact. A bone-jarring crash that set off the airbags and filled the air with the scent of burned rubber and deployed pyrotechnics. For a moment, everything was still. My ears rang, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my lip. Dazed, I turned to look at the passenger seat, expecting to see my attacker. But the seat was empty. I blinked, sure I must be hallucinating, but no, the hitchhiker was gone. There was no sign he'd ever been there, no wet footprints on the floor mat, no indentation in the seat, nothing. With shaking hands, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stumbled out of the car. The rain had stopped, and an eerie silence had fallen over the scene. My car was crumpled against the guardrail, steam rising from the hood. But there was no other person in sight. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call 911, when I heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Headlights appeared around the curve, and a car slowed to a stop near me. An older man rolled down his window, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, miss?" he called out. "I saw your car from up the road. Do you need help?" I opened my mouth to explain about the hitchhiker, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe what had happened when I wasn't even sure myself? Instead, I just nodded, relief washing over me at the sight of another person. The man got out of his car, pulling out his phone. "I'll call for help," he said, approaching me slowly as if afraid I might bolt. "Why don't you sit down? You look like you've had quite a shock." As he dialed, I sank to the ground, my legs no longer able to support me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and confused. I looked back at my car, half expecting to see the hitchhiker materialize in the passenger seat, but it remained empty. The sound of sirens in the distance snapped me back to reality. I turned to the man who had stopped to help. Did you see anyone else on the road tonight?" I asked hesitantly. He shook his head. "Not a soul. Roads have been empty because of the storm. You're the first car I've seen in miles." I nodded, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. As the flashing lights of the approaching emergency vehicles lit up the night, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had the hitchhiker been real? A hallucination brought on by fatigue and the stress of driving in the storm? Or something else entirely? Something I couldn't explain or didn't want to contemplate? The paramedics arrived, checking me over for injuries. The police took my statement, though I left out the parts about the hitchhiker's supernatural attributes. Even to my own ears, it sounded crazy. I told them I'd swerved to avoid an animal on the road, losing control in the rain. It was easier than trying to explain the unexplainable. As my car was loaded onto a tow truck and I prepared to leave in the back of a police cruiser, I took one last look at the scene. There, just visible in the mud by the side of the road, was a single footprint. It was too large to be mine, with an odd, inhuman shape to it. As I watched, the newly returned rain filled the print, erasing it from existence. I turned away, shivering. Whatever had happened tonight, whoever or whatever that hitchhiker had been, I knew one thing for certain. I would never pick up another stranger on the side of the road. Some rides are best left untaken, some stories best left untold. But on dark, stormy nights when the rain lashes against my windows, I still find myself checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a figure with two bright eyes staring back at me from the back seat. Story 3. The city never sleeps, they say. But at 2 a.m. it sure does get drowsy. That's when the real night owls come out to play, and sometimes to prey. I'd been working as a food delivery cyclist for about 6 months, mostly to supplement my day job and chip away at my student loans. The late-night shift paid better, and I figured the empty streets would make for faster deliveries. Plus, I've always been a bit of a night owl myself. The neon signs of closed shops cast an eerie glow on the wet pavement as I pedaled through the nearly deserted streets. My phone buzzed with a new order. Thai food to an address about 15 minutes away. I adjusted my backpack, making sure the heat-preserving compartment was secure, and set off. The only sounds were the whir of my bike chain and the occasional distant siren. Pretty standard for this time of night. I'd gotten used to the quiet, even started to enjoy it. It was like having the whole city to myself. As I turned onto a less well-lit street, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but years of city living had honed my instincts. I picked up my pace, the rhythm of my pedaling becoming more urgent. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the steady stride of a late-night jogger or the stumbling gait of someone heading home from the bars. These were purposeful, keeping pace with me despite my increased speed. I resisted the urge to look back, instead focusing on the road ahead. My heart pounded in my chest, drowning out the sound of my breathing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I made a sharp right turn, hoping to lose whoever was following me. The footsteps paused for a moment, then quickened. They were definitely following me now. I chanced to glance over my shoulder and saw a dark figure about half a block behind, moving with unnatural speed. Panic surged through me. I pedaled harder, my legs burning with the effort. The streets became a blur as I zigzagged through the grid, taking random turns in an attempt to shake my pursuer. But no matter how fast I went, how many turns I took, the footsteps remained. I was in an unfamiliar part of town now, the streets narrower and darker. Sweat dripped down my back despite the cool night air. My lungs felt like they were on fire. I couldn't keep this pace up much longer. Ahead, I spotted an alley between two buildings. Without thinking, I swerved into it, hoping for a shortcut or a hiding spot. The alley was barely wide enough for my handlebars, littered with trash and puddles of questionable origin. The smell of rotting garbage assaulted my nostrils. Halfway down the alley, my front tire hit something. A broken bottle, a piece of metal I couldn't tell. The bike lurched and I went flying over the handlebars. I hit the ground hard, the taste of blood filling my mouth as I bit my tongue. For a moment I lay there, dazed. Then the sound of those footsteps, now a slow, deliberate walk, jolted me back to reality. I scrambled to my feet, wincing at the pain in my right ankle. The bike lay twisted and useless on the ground. I limped deeper into the alley, searching desperately for an exit or a hiding place. My phone had fallen out of my pocket during the crash, its screen now a spiderweb of cracks. The app was still open, mockingly displaying the delivery address I'd never reach. The alley ended in a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it, I could see a dimly lit street. Safety, if only I could reach it. I grabbed the fence and started to climb, ignoring the screaming pain in my ankle and the way the metal links bit into my palms. I was halfway up when a hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me back down. I kicked and thrashed, but the grip was like iron. I fell back to the ground, the wind knocked out of me. A figure loomed over me, face hidden in shadow. I could smell stale cigarettes and something metallic, blood. My heart felt like it would explode from my chest. "Please," I gasped. "Take my wallet, take anything, just let me go." The figure crouched down, and for the first time I could make out features. It was a man, probably in his 40s, with a scraggly beard and eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Oh, I don't want your money," he said, his voice a low growl. "I've been watching you for weeks, always so careful, so alert. But tonight you got sloppy. I tried to scramble backward, but my back hit the fence. I was trapped." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out something that glinted in the faint light. A knife. I closed my eyes, certain this was the end, but the end didn't come. Instead, I heard a loud crash, followed by a yelp of pain. My eyes flew open to see my attacker sprawled on the ground, a trash can lid rolling away from him. Standing over him was another figure, smaller but radiating an aura of strength. As my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a woman, probably around my age. She held a heavy-looking backpack in her hands, ready to swing again if needed. "Run!" she shouted at me. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet and limped toward the entrance of the alley as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard sounds of a scuffle, grunts, and the thud of fists on flesh. When I reached the street, I turned back. The woman was jogging toward me, seemingly unharmed. My attacker was nowhere to be seen. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning me for injuries. I nodded, still too shocked to speak. "I'm Sarah," she said. "I'm a delivery cyclist, too. I saw you turn down this alley and thought it was weird. No one ever comes down here." Then I heard the crash. "Thank you," I finally managed to say. You saved my life." Sarah shrugged, but I could see the adrenaline leaving her system, her hands shaking slightly. "Us night owls have to stick together, right? Come on, let's get out of here and call the cops." As we walked to a better-lit area, I found my voice again. "I can't believe you took that guy on. Weren't you scared?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Terrified. But you know, working these late nights as a woman, you learn to be prepared." She patted her backpack. "Took a self-defense class last year, never thought I'd actually use it. We found an all-night diner and went inside. The fluorescent lights and smell of coffee were comforting, jarringly normal after what we'd just been through. Sarah insisted on buying me a cup of coffee while we waited for the police. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I started to shake, tears welling up in my eyes. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," she said softly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I keep thinking, if you hadn't shown up." "But I did," Sarah said firmly. "And now we're going to make sure this guy gets caught so he can't hurt anyone else." The police arrived, and we spent the next couple of hours giving statements. They seemed to take it seriously, especially when Sarah mentioned she thought she'd seen the same guy lurking around before. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light through the diner windows, the detective thanked us for our time. "We'll be in touch if we need any more information," he said. "In the meantime, please be careful out there." Sarah and I walked out of the diner together. The city was waking up, early morning commuters beginning to fill the streets. Everything looked different in the daylight, less threatening but also less magical. "So," Sarah said, turning to me, "think you'll keep doing the night shifts?" I hesitated. The thought of getting back on a bike and riding through those dark streets made my stomach churn. But then I looked at Sarah, tired, a bruise forming on her cheek but standing tall and unafraid. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself. "Yeah, I think I will, but maybe we could team up? Ride together when we're working the same areas?" Sarah's face broke into a grin. "I'd like that. Safety in numbers, right? As we exchanged numbers, I felt something I hadn't expected, a sense of empowerment. Yes, something terrifying had happened, but I'd survived. And I'd made a friend, an ally in the urban night. The city never sleeps, they say, and now I knew that while darkness could hide dangers, it could also reveal unexpected courage and connection. As I finally headed home, the rising sun at my back, I realized that I was no longer just a night owl. I was a guardian of the night, one of the unseen protectors of the sleeping city, and I was ready for whatever the next shift might bring. Story 4. The moment I saw the driver's face, I knew this traffic stop was about to go sideways. 15 years on the job, and I'd never seen eyes like that. Wild, desperate, and filled with a darkness that made my skin crawl. I should have trusted my gut and called for backup right then. Instead, I made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It had started as a routine night shift on Highway 41, a long stretch of road cutting through miles of dense forest. The kind of place where the darkness feels alive, pressing in on you from all sides. I'd been parked in my usual spot, radar gun in hand, when a sedan came tearing around the bend, doing at least 90 in a 65 zone. I flipped on my lights and sirens, pulling out to give chase. The car slowed immediately, which I took as a good sign. Most runners don't give up that easy. As we rolled to a stop on the shoulder, I radioed in my location and the license plate number, standard procedure for every stop. "Copy that, Officer Reeves," dispatch crackled back. "Be advised, we're experiencing some radio interference in your area. Signal may be spotty." I acknowledged the warning but didn't think much of it. Reception had always been dicey out here in the boonies. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the vehicle, noting the out-of-state plates and the way the driver was hunched over the steering wheel. "Evening, sir," I said, pitching my voice to carry over the sound of crickets and distant highway noise. "License and registration, please." The driver's head snapped up, and that's when I got my first good look at him. Mid-30s, unkempt beard, clothes that looked like he'd been sleeping in them for days. But it was his eyes that stopped me, cold, bloodshot, and darting around like a cornered animal. He fumbled in his pocket, movements jerky and uncoordinated. I tensed, my hand instinctively moving closer to my holster, but he just pulled out a wallet, nearly dropping it as he extracted his license with trembling fingers. Sorry, officer," he stammered, thrusting the license at me. "I know I was speeding. I'm in a hurry." I took the license, noting the man's name, Michael Carr, and his home address in Nevada. "Long way from home, Mr. Carr. Where are you headed in such a rush?" He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. I got a call. Family emergency. My sister, He trailed off, gaze sliding past me to fix on something in the darkness beyond. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I dealt with plenty of stressed-out drivers before, but something about this guy's demeanor was setting off all kinds of alarms. I needed to get a better read on the situation. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Why don't you step out of the car for me?" Carr's eyes snapped back to my face, wide with panic. Is that really necessary? I told you, I'm in a hurry." "It won't take but a minute, sir," I insisted, taking a step back to give him room. "Please exit the vehicle." For a moment I thought he might refuse. Then, with agonizing slowness, he opened the door and unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was taller than I expected, well over 6 feet, with the lanky build of someone who'd recently lost a lot of weight. As he straightened up, I caught a whiff of something that made my nose wrinkle. Not body odor or booze, but a sharp chemical smell I couldn't quite place. I filed that information away for later. "Everything all right, Mr. Carr?" I asked, watching him sway slightly on his feet. "You seem a bit out of sorts." He ran a hand through his matted hair, eyes darting between me and the tree line. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Just tired. Been driving a long time." I nodded, playing along. "I understand. Long trips can be rough. Why don't you tell me a bit more about this family emergency while I run your license?" As I spoke, I reached for my radio to call in the license check. That's when things started to go seriously wrong. The radio crackled to life before I could key the mic, spitting out a burst of static that made us both jump. Through the noise, I could barely make out dispatch's voice. "Repeat, all units, 1099. Suspect vehicle, armed and dangerous." My blood ran cold. 1099, wanted person. I looked up to see Carr's face contort with a mixture of fear and rage. "You set me up," he snarled, any pretense of cooperation vanishing in an instant. I raised my hands, trying to project calm. "Nobody's setting you up, Mr. Carr. Let's just take a breath and—" I never got to finish that sentence. Carr lunged at me with surprising speed, his bony shoulder catching me in the solar plexus. The impact knocked the wind out of me and sent us both sprawling onto the gravel shoulder. Stars exploded behind my eyes as my head cracked against the pavement. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Carr scrambling to his feet. I rolled onto my side, fighting to draw breath, and saw him sprinting for the tree line. Training kicked in, overriding the pain. I staggered upright, hand going to my holster as I shouted, "Stop! Police!" Carr didn't even slow down. He plunged into the underbrush, branches whipping behind him. I hesitated for a split second, years of procedure warring with the urgency of the moment. Procedure said to wait for backup, secure the scene. But backup could be miles away, and every second gave Carr more of a lead. Cursing under my breath, I plunged into the forest after him. The woods were a nightmare of tangled roots and grasping branches. My flashlight beam bounced crazily as I ran, catching glimpses of Carr's retreating form. He was fast, desperation lending him speed, but I could hear his ragged breathing growing closer. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing. Carr was in the center, hunched over and gasping for air. As my light fell on him, he spun to face me, and I saw the glint of metal in his hand. "Drop the weapon," I bellowed, my own gun already drawn and aimed. "Do it now." Time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail with preternatural clarity. The sweat gleaming on Carr's face, the slight tremor in the hand holding the gun, the way his chest heaved with each frantic breath. "You don't understand," he wheezed, eyes wild. "I can't go back, I won't." "Whatever you're mixed up in," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "We can work it out, but you need to put the gun down. Now." For a moment, I thought I was getting through to him. His arm lowered a fraction, uncertainty flickering across his face. Then his expression hardened, and I knew with sick certainty what was about to happen. "I'm sorry," Carr whispered. His arm came up. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger, and in that eternal split second, as training and instinct took over, a single thought blazed through my mind. I never should have left my car. The sound of gunshots shattered the night, echoing through the trees like thunder. Birds exploded from the branches overhead, their startled cries mixing with the acrid smell of cordite. When the echoes faded, I found myself on my knees, ears ringing and hands shaking. My gun was still aimed at the spot where Carr had been standing, but he was down, sprawled motionless on the forest floor. I approached cautiously, every nerve on high alert. But as I got closer, it was clear the threat had passed. Carr's eyes stared sightlessly at the canopy above, a dark stain spreading across his chest. I holstered my weapon with numb fingers and reached for my radio, only to find it had been damaged in the fall. The forest pressed in around me, silent and accusing, as the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. I had taken a life. In the line of duty, yes, but the knowledge brought no comfort as I stood over Carr's body. Who was he running from? What had driven him to such desperation? I would probably never know. As I turned to make the long walk back to my cruiser, a glint of white caught my eye. A piece of paper had fallen from Carr's pocket during the struggle. I picked it up, unfolding it with trembling hands. It was a photograph, creased and worn as if it had been handled many times. In it, a younger, happier version of Michael Carr smiled at the camera, his arm around a woman holding a baby. Scrawled on the back in messy handwriting were 3 words, "Come home soon." The photo blurred as tears filled my eyes. I carefully refolded it and placed it back in Carr's pocket, my throat tight with unspeakable regret. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching, backup arriving too late to change anything. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as I prepared to face the aftermath of this night. But as I walked out of those woods, leaving Michael Carr's body behind, I knew that a part of me would always remain in that clearing, haunted by the choices made in the dark and the lines crossed that could never be uncrossed. Story 5. The stench hit me first, a putrid wave that made my eyes water even through my mask. But it wasn't the usual reek of rotting food and festering trash. This smell was different, sharper, metallic. Wrong. I've been a garbage collector for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover on that muggy Tuesday morning. It was barely 5 a.m., and the world was still cloaked in pre-dawn darkness. I'd been on the job since 3, making my usual rounds through the sleepy suburban neighborhoods of Millbrook. My partner, Eddie, was out sick, so I was flying solo. Just me, my thoughts, and the rhythmic rumble of the garbage truck. I pulled up to the Johnson house, a sprawling Victorian that always gave me the creeps. Old man Johnson had passed away a few months back, and the place had been sitting empty ever since. Funny thing was, the trash cans were still being put out every week like clockwork. I hopped down from the cab, my boots hitting the damp asphalt with a soft thud. The air was thick with humidity, promising another scorcher of a day. I grabbed the first can and hoisted it up, ready to dump it into the truck's gaping maw. That's when I felt it. A subtle shift in weight, like something inside was moving. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. In this job, you learn to expect the unexpected. Raccoons, stray cats, even the occasional possum. But this felt different. I set the can down slowly, my hands shaking as I reached for the lid. Part of me didn't want to look, wanted to just dump the whole thing and move on, but curiosity won out over caution. I lifted the lid and the smell hit me full force. My stomach lurched and I had to fight the urge to retch. Forcing myself to look inside, I saw a large black garbage bag among the usual household trash. It was tied tightly, but even in the dim light, I could see it was moving. A muffled sound came from within, a whimper or maybe a cry. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an animal. This was something else entirely. I reached for the bag, my mind racing. Should I open it? Call the police? Before I could decide, the roar of an engine shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Headlights swept across me as a car screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway. 2 men jumped out, their faces hidden in shadow. They sprinted towards me, shouting something I couldn't make out over the pounding of blood in my ears. In that moment, instinct took over. I grabbed the bag from the trash can and ran for the truck. I could hear footsteps pounding behind me, getting closer with each second. I yanked open the passenger door and tossed the bag inside, then scrambled into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life just as one of the men reached the truck. He slammed his fists against the door, his face a mask of rage in the side mirror. "Give it back!" he screamed. "You don't know what you're doing!" I threw the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The tires squealed as I peeled away, leaving the men in a cloud of exhaust and confusion. My mind was reeling as I sped down the empty streets. What the hell had just happened? What was in that bag? And who were those men? A muffled cry from the passenger seat snapped me back to reality. Right, the bag. I needed to deal with that first. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind an abandoned strip mall, killed the engine, and turned on the cabin light. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the black plastic bag. It had stopped moving, but I could hear faint sounds coming from inside. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the bag. My hands were trembling as I untied the knot. As the plastic fell away, I found myself face to face with a pair of wide, terrified eyes. It was a child, a little girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old. She was pale and thin, with matted blonde hair and tear-stained cheeks. A piece of duct tape covered her mouth. "Oh, God," I whispered, my voice cracking. I gently peeled off the tape, trying not to hurt her. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." She didn't speak, just stared at me with those huge, frightened eyes. I noticed bruises on her arms and a cut above her eyebrow. My stomach churned with a mixture of rage and nausea. I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, when a thought stopped me cold. Those men knew where I worked. They'd seen my truck. If I called the police now, how long before they tracked me down? The girl whimpered, snapping me out of my paranoid spiral. Right, one problem at a time. First, I needed to get her somewhere safe. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and soothing. "I'm Mike. What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Lily." "That's a pretty name, Lily. Listen, I'm going to take you somewhere safe, okay? Do you have any family nearby? Anyone we can call?" She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "They took me," she said, her voice barely audible. "The bad men. They said if I was good, they'd let me go home. but they lied. My heart broke for this little girl, for what she must have been through. I wanted to hunt down the bastards who'd done this and make them pay. But right now, Lily needed me to be calm and focused. "It's okay, Lily," I said, forcing a smile. "Those bad men can't hurt you anymore. I'm going to make sure of that." I helped her into the passenger seat and buckled her in. As I started the engine, I realized I had no idea where to go. I couldn't take her to the police, not yet anyway. Not until I figured out how deep this thing went. Then it hit me, my sister Kate. She lived about an hour away and worked from home. If anyone would know what to do, it'd be her. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number, praying she'd be awake. After 4 rings, a groggy voice answered. "Mike, do you have any idea what time it is?" "Kate, I need your help," I said, cutting her off. "I'm in trouble, big trouble. And I've got a little girl with me who needs a safe place to stay." There was a long pause, then, "What the hell did you get yourself into, Mike?" I gave her the condensed version as I drove, keeping one eye on the rearview mirror for any signs of pursuit. When I finished, Kate was silent for a moment. "Jesus, Mike," she finally said. I don't even know what this is. Are you sure you don't want to go to the police?" "Not yet," I said. "Those guys knew who I was, Kate. They knew where I worked. I need to figure out what's going on before I involve the cops." She sighed. "All right, come to my place. We'll figure this out together." The drive to Kate's felt like the longest hour of my life. Every set of headlights made me flinch. Sure, it was those men coming after us. Lily had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her small body curled up in the passenger seat. We finally pulled into Kate's driveway just as the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. She was waiting for us on the porch, her face a mixture of concern and determination. As I carried the sleeping Lily inside, Kate whispered, "What are we going to do, Mike?" I looked down at the little girl in my arms, so small and vulnerable. In that moment, I knew there was only one answer. "We're going to protect her," I said. "And we're going to find out who did this and make them pay." Kate nodded, her jaw set. "I'll make some calls," she said. "I've got a friend in social services who might be able to help." As I laid Lily down on the guest bed, I realized my life had changed irrevocably in the space of a few hours. My ordinary job had thrust me into something dark and dangerous. But looking at Lily's peaceful face, I knew I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Whatever came next, whatever dangers we faced, I'd see this through. For Lily, and for all the other children who might be out there, trapped in garbage bags and praying for rescue. I settled into a chair by the bed, prepared to stand guard for as long as necessary. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. A new day was dawning, and with it the start of a fight I never expected to face. But as Lily stirred in her sleep, reaching out as if seeking comfort, I knew one thing for certain. I was ready for whatever came next. The garbage collector was about to become something else entirely, a protector, an investigator, and maybe, just maybe, a hero. Story 6. They say a cop's intuition is their best tool. After 15 years on the job, I've learned to trust that nagging feeling in my gut. Tonight, it's screaming at me that something's very wrong. The headlights of my patrol car cut through the darkness, illuminating a lonely stretch of highway. It's just past midnight, and I'm halfway through my shift. The radio's been quiet, too quiet. That's when I spot the semi-truck ahead, weaving slightly between the lanes. I flip on my lights, more out of procedure than any real suspicion of drunk driving. Truckers work long hours. Sometimes fatigue gets the best of them. Usually a warning is all it takes. But as the truck slowly pulls onto the shoulder, that uneasy feeling intensifies. I park about 20 feet behind the truck, angling my car slightly to the left, a habit drilled into us at the academy. It offers some protection if an inattentive driver doesn't see us and drifts onto the shoulder. I radio in my location and the truck's plates, then step out into the cool night air. The first thing that hits me is the silence. Out here, miles from the nearest town, you'd expect to hear insects, maybe the rustle of small animals in the nearby fields. But there's nothing. It's as if the whole world is holding its breath. I approach the driver's side, my right hand resting casually near my holster. It's not a conscious action anymore, just muscle memory from years on the job. The cab of the truck looms above me, its engine ticking as it cools. "Evening, sir," I call out, pitching my voice to be heard over any road noise. "License and registration, please." There's a long pause before I hear movement inside the cab. The window rolls down slowly, and I'm hit with a wave of stale air and something else. A smell I can't quite place, but that sets my nerves on edge. The driver is a middle-aged man, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a few days' worth of stubble. His eyes dart around, never quite meeting mine. "Evening, officer," he says, his voice hoarse. "What seems to be the problem?" I explain about the weaving, keeping my tone conversational. But as he hands over his documents, I notice his hands are shaking. Not the slight tremor of fatigue I'm used to seeing in long-haul drivers, but violent tremors that he's struggling to control. "Everything all right tonight, sir?" I ask, shining my flashlight into the cab. "It's messier than usual. Fast food wrappers, empty energy drink cans, and is that blood on the passenger seat?" The driver follows my gaze and quickly throws a jacket over the seat. "Just spilled some ketchup earlier," he says with a forced laugh. You know how it is on the road. I nod, but that uneasy feeling is now a klaxon in my head. Something is very, very wrong here. "Mind if I take a look in the back of your truck?" I ask, trying to keep my voice steady. The driver's face goes pale. I'd rather you didn't. Company policy, you know. Need special permission." I'm about to press the issue when I hear it, a muffled thump from the trailer behind us. It could be anything. Shifting cargo, maybe. But combined with everything else, it's enough to make me take a step back, my hand now firmly on my weapon. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," I say, my voice taking on the authoritative tone we use when things are about to go sideways. For a moment, I think he's going to comply. He reaches for the door handle, and I feel myself relax slightly. That's when he lunges, not at me, but at something on the seat beside him. I draw my weapon in one fluid motion, muscle memory taking over. "Hands where I can see them," I shout, but it's too late. The driver's hand comes up holding a revolver. Time seems to slow down. I see his finger tightening on the trigger, hear the deafening roar of the gunshot. I feel a searing pain in my left shoulder as I dive for cover behind the truck's massive front tire. My radio crackles to life. Dispatch responding to the sound of gunfire picked up from my open mic. I hear the driver's door slam open, footsteps running towards the back of the truck. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I peer around the tire. The driver is fumbling with the lock on the trailer, glancing frantically between me and the door. "Police! Drop your weapon!" I yell. But he ignores me, finally getting the door open. What happens next will stay with me for the rest of my life. A figure bursts out of the trailer, a young woman, her clothes torn, hands bound in front of her. She stumbles and falls to the ground. The driver grabs her, using her as a shield as he backs away from the truck. "Stay back!" he shouts, his voice cracking with panic. "I'll kill her, I swear I will." The woman's eyes meet mine, wide with terror and desperation. In that moment, I know I can't wait for backup. This ends now, one way or another. I take a deep breath, trying to steady my aim despite the throbbing pain in my shoulder. The driver is wild-eyed, his gun moving erratically between me and his hostage. I need a clean shot, but he's not giving me one. "Let her go," I say, trying to keep my voice calm. "You don't want to make this any worse than it already is." He laughs, a high-pitched, manic sound. "Worse, do you have any idea what they'll do to me in prison? No, this ends here." He starts to turn the gun toward the woman's head. Time slows down again. I see his finger tightening on the trigger, see the woman's eyes squeeze shut. I fire. The sound is deafening in the quiet night. The driver staggers, a look of surprise on his face as he looks down at the growing red stain on his chest. His gun falls from limp fingers as he crumples to the ground. I rush forward, kicking the gun away before checking on the woman. She's shaking uncontrollably but appears unharmed. I use my good arm to help her sit up, murmuring what I hope are comforting words as I free her hands. It's only then, with the immediate danger past, that I allow myself to really feel the pain in my shoulder. I sink to the ground next to the woman, my back against the truck's wheel. In the distance, I can hear sirens approaching. "It's over," I tell her, and myself. "You're safe now." She doesn't speak, just nods and begins to cry softly. I want to comfort her more, to ask what happened, but I know that will come later. For now, we both need medical attention and the safety of backup. As we wait, I find myself staring at the open trailer. In the faint glow of my flashlight, I can see more restraints inside, evidence of other victims. The realization of what I've stumbled upon, a human trafficking operation, hits me like a physical blow. The sirens grow louder and soon the area is awash in flashing lights. Paramedics rush to attend to us while my fellow officers secure the scene. As I'm being loaded into an ambulance, my sergeant approaches. "You did good, Jackson," he says, his usual gruff demeanor softened with concern. "We've got a lot of questions, but they can wait. You focus on getting patched up." I nod, suddenly exhausted. As the ambulance doors close, I catch one last glimpse of the scene. The truck, now surrounded by crime scene tape, the covered body of the driver, and the young woman wrapped in a shock blanket talking to a female officer. In that moment, despite the pain and the horror of what I've witnessed, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Grateful that I trusted my instincts, grateful that my aim was true, grateful that I was able to save at least one life tonight. As we pull away, the adrenaline finally wearing off, I close my eyes. The job is dangerous, often heartbreaking, but nights like this remind me why I became a cop in the first place. To protect and serve, it's not just a motto, it's a calling. And tonight, answering that call made all the difference in the world. Story 7. The moment I saw the roadblock, I knew our family vacation had taken a turn into dangerous territory. What I didn't realize was how quickly we'd be forced to make a decision that could mean life or death for all of us. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a long weekend getaway to celebrate my daughter Lily's 10th birthday. My wife Sarah had found a great deal on a cabin rental up in the mountains, and we'd been looking forward to some hiking, fishing, and quality family time away from the chaos of city life. We'd left early that morning, our minivan packed to the brim with camping gear, snacks, and Lily's collection of stuffed animals. The first few hours of the drive had been uneventful, filled with sing-alongs to Lily's favorite pop songs and Sarah's attempts to get us all to play I Spy. As we started winding our way up into the mountains, the scenery became more rugged and the towns more sparse. I was just starting to worry about our fuel level when we rounded a sharp bend and came face to face with the roadblock. It wasn't much, just a couple of sawhorses with flashing lights and a hand-painted sign that read, "Road Closed Detour." But something about it set my teeth on edge. Maybe it was the fact that we hadn't passed any construction vehicles or warning signs leading up to this point. Or maybe it was the two men standing next to an unmarked SUV, their postures tense and alert in a way that screamed trouble. I slowed the van to a crawl, every instinct telling me to turn around and get out of there. But before I could, one of the men stepped into the road, holding up a hand to stop us. "What's going on, Dad?" Lily piped up from the back seat, craning her neck to see past me. "I'm not sure, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Looks like there might be a problem with the road ahead." Sarah shot me a worried glance as I rolled down the window. The man who had flagged us down approached, and I got my first good look at him. He was tall and lean, with close-cropped hair and the kind of tan you get from working outdoors. He was wearing what looked like a uniform, but there were no patches or insignia that I could see. "Evening, folks," he said, his tone friendly enough but his eyes sharp and assessing. "I'm afraid we've got a situation up ahead. There's been a pretty bad accident about a mile up the road and we're having to reroute traffic." I frowned, a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. "An accident? We haven't seen any emergency vehicles." The man's smile never wavered, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. "They're up at the scene now. We're just handling traffic control down here. If you'll just follow the detour, it'll take you around and back to the main road in about 20 miles. He gestured to a narrow dirt road branching off to the right, barely visible in the gathering dusk. I glanced at Sarah, seeing my own unease mirrored in her expression. "Is there no other way through?" she asked, leaning across me to address the man. "We're running a bit low on gas, and I'm not sure we have enough to add 20 miles to our trip." The man's partner had drifted closer during our conversation. He was shorter and stockier, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that never seemed to settle in one place for long. "Afraid not, ma'am," the first man said, his tone taking on an edge of impatience. "It's this way or turn back. Your choice." I looked at the dirt road again, my mind racing. It disappeared into thick forest after only a few hundred yards, and something about it felt wrong, like a trap waiting to be sprung. "Maybe we should turn around," I said quietly to Sarah. "Find somewhere to fill up and try again tomorrow." Before she could respond, the bearded man spoke up. "That wouldn't be advisable," he said, his voice gruff. "Storm coming in tonight. This road will be closed for at least a day, maybe more. Detour's your best bet if you want to get where you're going." As if on cue, I felt the first few drops of rain hit the windshield. Dark clouds were gathering overhead and a cool wind had picked up, rustling the trees around us. I looked at Sarah again, seeing the conflict in her eyes. We both knew something wasn't right here, but with Lily in the car and night falling fast, our options were limited. "What do you think?" I murmured, low enough that only she could hear. She bit her lip, glancing back at Lily, who was watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes. "I don't like it," she whispered back. "But if there really is a storm coming..." I nodded, understanding her unspoken concern. Being stranded on a mountain road in bad weather with a child was its own kind of danger. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to the men. "All right," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We'll take the detour. Can you give us some landmarks to watch for, make sure we're on the right track?" The first man's smile returned a little too quickly. "Sure thing. Just follow the road for about 10 miles. You'll come to a fork, take the left branch. After that, it's pretty straightforward. You'll hit the main road again just past a big red barn. Can't miss it." I nodded, committing the directions to memory. As I put the van in gear, the bearded man stepped back, giving us room to turn onto the dirt road. "Drive safe now," the first man called as we pulled away. "And don't stop for anything, you hear? Some folks around these parts aren't too friendly to outsiders." That last comment sent a chill down my spine, but I forced a smile and a wave as we bumped onto the unpaved surface. For the first few minutes, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under our tires and the steady patter of rain on the roof. Lily had gone quiet in the back seat, picking up on the tension that filled the van. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Do you think we made the right choice?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, peering through the gloom ahead. The rain was coming down harder now, and our headlights seemed pitifully inadequate against the encroaching darkness. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're committed now. All we can do is stay alert and hope for the best." She nodded, reaching over to squeeze my arm. "At least we're together," she said softly. I managed a small smile at that. Whatever we were driving into, we'd face it as a family. As we wound deeper into the forest, the road became increasingly treacherous. Potholes and washouts forced me to slow to a crawl in places, and overhanging branches scraped ominously against the roof of the van. "Dad?" Lily's voice came from the back, small and uncertain. "I don't like this road. It's scary." "I know, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "But we'll be back on the main road soon. Why don't you tell us about what you want to do first when we get to the cabin?" As Lily launched into a detailed description of her plans for making s'mores, I exchanged a worried glance with Sarah. We both knew we were well past the 10-mile mark the man had mentioned, and there had been no sign of a fork in the road. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, our headlights illuminated a weathered wooden sign half hidden by undergrowth. The writing was faded, but I could just make out the words, "River Fork 1 mile." "There!" Sarah exclaimed, pointing. "That must be the fork he was talking about." I nodded, feeling a small surge of relief. At least we were on the right track, even if the distances were off. But as we rounded the next bend, that relief evaporated. The road ahead split not into 2 branches, but 3, each one disappearing into the dark forest. "Which way?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. I slowed to a stop, staring at the 3 options before us. The man had said to take the left fork, but he'd only mentioned 2 branches. Going straight ahead seemed the most logical choice, but what if that led us even further off course? As I sat there, paralyzed by indecision, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. For just a second, I thought I saw a figure standing among the trees to our right, tall and unnaturally still, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. But the image sent a jolt of fear through me, galvanizing me into action. "We're going back," I announced, already starting to turn the van around. "This isn't right. None of this is right." Sarah didn't argue, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. As I completed the 3-point turn, our headlights swept across the trees where I'd seen the figure. There was nothing there now, but I could have sworn I saw movement just at the edge of the light. I gunned the engine, no longer worried about potholes or washouts. We had to get out of here, back to the main road and civilization. But as we retraced our path, my heart sank. The road looked different going this way. Turns I didn't remember, landmarks that seemed unfamiliar. Had we somehow gotten turned around? "John," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look." I followed her gaze to the rearview mirror and felt my blood run cold. Headlights had appeared behind us, gaining quickly. "Hang on," I growled, pressing the accelerator to the floor. As we hurtled through the night, rain lashing the windshield and unknown pursuers at our backs, I realized with grim certainty that our family vacation had become a fight for survival. And the real test was only just beginning. Story 8. The dashboard clock read 2:37 a.m. when I spotted the erratic driver. Weaving between lanes, no taillights, textbook DUI. In my 15 years on the force, I'd seen it all, but something about this stop made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't have known then that this routine traffic stop would be the beginning of the longest night of my life. I flipped on the lights and sirens, signaling the car to pull over. It took longer than usual, but eventually the vehicle came to a stop on the shoulder of the empty highway. I radioed in my location and the license plate number, standard procedure, before stepping out of my cruiser. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the dense forest lining both sides of the road. My boots crunched on gravel as I approached the vehicle, flashlight in hand. It was an older model sedan, dark blue, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. "Evening, folks," I called out, my voice carrying in the still night. "I'm Officer Reeves with the State Highway Patrol. Could you please roll down your window?" There was a long pause before the driver's side window slowly lowered. The interior of the car was dark, but I could make out the silhouette of the driver, a woman, I thought, though it was hard to be sure. "License and registration, please," I said, keeping my tone professional but firm. The driver didn't respond immediately. Instead, I heard a strange, muffled sound, like someone trying to speak through a gag. A chill ran down my spine. "Ma'am? Sir, are you all right?" I asked, leaning in slightly to get a better look. That's when I saw the driver's face clearly for the first time. It was a woman, probably in her mid-30s, with wide, terrified eyes. She was trying to speak, but there was duct tape over her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at me, silently pleading for help. My training kicked in immediately. I reached for my gun, but my hand grasped empty air. My holster was empty. Panic surged through me as I realized I'd left my weapon in the cruiser, a rookie mistake I hadn't made in years. Before I could react, the back door of the car flew open. A figure lunged out, tall, masked, dressed all in black. In their hand was my gun, pointed directly at my chest. "Don't move, officer," a voice growled from behind the mask. "Hands where I can see them." I raised my hands slowly, my mind racing. How had they gotten my gun? Had I been set up? None of this made sense. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever's going on here, we can work it out. Just put the gun down and let's talk." The masked figure laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Oh, we're long past talking, Officer Reeves. Get in the car, back seat, now." I hesitated, weighing my options. I could try to overpower them, but with my own gun pointed at me, the risk was too high. My radio was back in the cruiser, out of reach. For now, my best bet was to play along and look for an opportunity. Slowly, I moved towards the car. As I got closer, I could see the driver more clearly. Her hands were bound to the steering wheel with zip ties, and there was fear in her eyes as she looked at me. I slid into the back seat, my heart pounding. The masked figure followed, keeping the gun trained on me as they closed the door. "Drive!" they commanded the woman up front. With shaking hands, she put the car in gear and pulled back onto the highway. As we drove, I tried to piece together what was happening. This was clearly no ordinary traffic stop gone wrong. The level of planning, the fact that they had my gun, this was something bigger, something organized. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Shut up," the masked figure snapped. "You'll find out soon enough." We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes. The woman at the wheel was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to reassure her somehow, but with the gun pointed at me, I didn't dare speak. Finally, we turned off the main highway onto a dirt road that led deep into the forest. After a few more minutes, we came to a stop in front of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. "Out," the masked figure ordered, gesturing with the gun. As we exited the car, I got my first good look at our surroundings. The warehouse was larger than I'd initially thought, its windows dark and broken. The forest pressed in close on all sides, and I could hear the faint sound of running water somewhere nearby. We were marched inside, the masked figure keeping the gun trained on us. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit by a few bare bulbs, revealing rows of crates and old machinery. But what caught my attention was the group of people huddled in the corner, at least a dozen, all bound and gagged like the woman from the car. "What is this?" I demanded, unable to keep the shock from my voice. "Who are you people?" The masked figure chuckled darkly. "Welcome to the game, Officer Reeves. You're our guest of honor tonight." More figures emerged from the shadows, 3, 4, 5 of them, all masked and armed. They surrounded us, herding the woman and me towards the group of captives. One of them, slightly taller than the rest, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "You see, officer, we've been watching you for some time. Your dedication to duty, your unfailing moral compass, it's all very admirable. But tonight, we're going to put that to the test." He gestured towards the captives. "These people are all wanted by various criminal organizations. Some for theft, some for betrayal, some simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Your job is to choose which ones live and which ones die." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're insane," I spat. "I won't play your sick game." The leader shrugged. "Then they all die, including you and our lovely driver here. The choice is yours." My mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was like something out of a twisted horror movie. But the gun pointed at my head and the terrified faces of the captives were all too real. "Why?" I asked, stalling for time as I tried to think of a way out. "Why are you doing this?" "Why does anyone do anything?" the leader replied. "For power, for money, for the sheer thrill of it. But mostly, Officer Reeves, we're doing this because we can. Now, enough stalling. You have 5 minutes to make your first choice or we start shooting at random." I looked at the captives, my heart breaking. Men, women, even a teenager, all looking at me with a mixture of hope and terror. How could I possibly choose who lived or died? As the minutes ticked by, I racked my brain for a solution. There had to be a way out of this, some way to save everyone, but with every passing second, that hope seemed to slip further away. Just as I opened my mouth, to say what, I wasn't sure, a sound cut through the tense silence. A siren, faint but growing louder. The masked figures looked at each other in panic. "How?" one of them hissed. "We took care of his radio." The leader turned to me, his eyes narrowing behind the mask. "What did you do?" I was just as confused as they were, but I wasn't about to let them know that. I straightened up, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "Did you really think I came alone? I'm a state trooper. We look out for our own..." It was a bluff, but it seemed to work. The warehouse erupted into chaos as the masked figures argued among themselves, trying to decide what to do. In the confusion, I saw my chance. I lunged for the nearest captor, tackling him to the ground. We struggled for the gun, rolling on the dirty warehouse floor. I could hear shouts and gunshots, but I stayed focused on the fight at hand. Finally, my hand closed around the grip of the gun. I wrenched it away, then brought the butt down hard on my attacker's head. He went limp beneath me. I stood up, gun at the ready, to find the warehouse swarming with police officers. My backup had arrived, not a moment too soon. As the masked figures were rounded up and the captives freed, I sagged against a nearby crate, the adrenaline leaving my system in a rush. A fellow officer, Johnson from the night shift, approached me. "Reeves, you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. How did you know to come?" Johnson grinned. "You can thank that new GPS tracking system they installed in our cruisers last month. When you didn't respond to dispatch and your car showed you off your usual route, we knew something was up." I laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. All of this, the terror, the impossible choices, undone by a piece of technology I'd complained about as an unnecessary expense. As I watched the scene unfold, paramedics tending to the freed captives, officers leading away the masked criminals, I felt a profound sense of relief, tinged with lingering unease. We'd won this time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. One thing was certain: I'd never look at a routine traffic stop the same way again. In our line of work, you never know when a simple call might turn into the night that changes everything. Story 9. They say one man's trash is another man's treasure. But sometimes what you find in the garbage can change your life forever, and not always for the better. The pre-dawn air is crisp as I guide the rumbling garbage truck down familiar streets. It's a Tuesday in late October, leaves crunching under the massive tires. I've been working this route for 5 years now, and there's a comforting rhythm to it all. Wake up at 3 a.m., coffee, then out to face the sleeping city and its refuse. My partner, Eddie, hangs off the back of the truck as we approach our first stop. He's been with me for about 6 months now, still green but eager to learn. As I bring the truck to a stop, he hops off and starts wheeling bins toward the hydraulic lift. "Man, I don't think I'll ever get used to this smell," Eddie grumbles, wrinkling his nose as he tips a particularly pungent bin into the hopper. I chuckle, breathing through my mouth. "Give it time, kid. After a while, you won't even notice it." We continue down the street, the mechanical arm of the truck lifting and emptying bins with practiced efficiency. It's mindless work, but honest. Plus, it pays the bills and keeps me in shape. Who needs a gym membership when you're lifting trash all day? As we turn onto Maple Street, I notice something odd. The dumpster behind Old Man Johnson's place is pulled away from the wall. In 5 years, I've never seen it out of place. Johnson's a creature of habit, if ever there was one. "Hey, Eddie," I call out. "Let's check that one manually. Looks like it might be stuck." Eddie nods and hops off the truck. I put it in park and join him, the two of us approaching the dumpster cautiously. As we get closer, that nagging feeling in my gut intensifies. Something's not right here. The smell hits us first, not the usual reek of garbage, but something metallic and sickly sweet. I've smelled it before, years ago when I found a dead raccoon in my backyard. It's the unmistakable odor of decay. Eddie gags, turning away. "Jesus, what is that?" I hold my breath and peer into the dumpster. At first, all I see is the usual assortment of trash bags and loose garbage. But then something catches my eye. A flash of pale skin beneath a torn garbage bag. My heart starts racing. "Eddie, go back to the truck and call this in. Now," he must hear the urgency in my voice because he doesn't argue, just turns and jogs back to the cab. With shaking hands, I reach out and move the garbage bag aside. The face that stares back at me is pale and lifeless, eyes cloudy and unfocused. It's a young woman, probably in her early 20s. Dark bruises mar her neck, telling a grim story of her final moments. I stumble back, my mind reeling. In all my years on this job, I've never found anything like this. Sure, we occasionally find weird or suspicious stuff, but a body? This is way above my pay grade. Eddie returns, his face pale. "Dispatch says police are on their way. What's going—" He stops short as he sees my expression. "Oh God, is it what I think it is?" I nod grimly. "Yeah, kid, we've got a body." The next few hours pass in a blur. Police cars arrive, their lights painting the quiet street in flashes of red and blue. Detectives in suits ask us questions, taking detailed notes. Crime scene technicians in white coveralls meticulously comb through the dumpster and the surrounding area. As the sun begins to rise, casting long shadows down the street, a detective approaches us. His badge identifies him as Detective Ramirez. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Guzman," he addresses us, his voice grave. "I want to thank you both for your quick action this morning. You've potentially given us a big break in a case we've been working on." Eddie and I exchange glances. "A case?" I ask. Ramirez nods. "We've had 3 young women go missing in the last 2 months. Until now, we had no solid leads. This changes things." A chill runs down my spine as the implications sink in. This isn't just a random murder. It could be the work of a serial killer. "Now," Ramirez continues, "I need to ask you both to keep this quiet for now. We don't want to tip off the perpetrator that we've found one of his victims. Can I count on your discretion?" We both nod solemnly, as if we'd want to talk about this anyway. As Ramirez turns to leave, a commotion near the dumpster catches our attention. One of the crime scene techs is calling out, waving a small object in a plastic evidence bag. Ramirez jogs over, takes one look at the bag, and his whole demeanor changes. He barks orders at nearby officers, who immediately start expanding the perimeter of the crime scene. "What's going on?" Eddie asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I can answer, I hear footsteps approaching rapidly from behind us. I turn just in time to see a figure barreling towards us, wild-eyed and desperate. It's Old Man Johnson, still in his bathrobe and slippers. "What are you doing?" he shouts, his voice cracking. "You can't be here. You need to leave now." 2 officers intercept him before he can reach us, restraining him as he struggles and shouts incoherently. As they lead him away, his eyes meet mine. What I see there sends a chill through my body. Not anger or confusion, but naked fear. Detective Ramirez is back, his face grim. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Guzman, I'm afraid I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give formal statements." The rest of the day passes in a haze of fluorescent lights and endless questions. By the time we're released, the sun is setting. Eddie and I stand outside the police station, both of us exhausted and shell-shocked. "I can't believe it," Eddie says, shaking his head. "Old Man Johnson? He always seemed so normal." I nod, still trying to process everything. You never really know people, I guess. We're quiet for a moment, the events of the day weighing heavily on us. Finally, Eddie speaks up. "You think we'll be able to finish the route tomorrow?" The question catches me off guard, and I find myself laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that echoes off the building behind us. "Yeah, kid, life goes on. The garbage doesn't stop, even for murder." As we part ways, I can't shake the feeling that everything has changed. The city I've known for years suddenly feels different, darker, more dangerous. Every shadow seems to hide a potential threat, every closed door a possible crime scene. That night I toss and turn, unable to sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see the face of that poor girl in the dumpster. I see Old Man Johnson's terrified eyes as he's led away. I wonder about the families of the other missing women still waiting for answers. As dawn breaks, I drag myself out of bed, feeling anything but rested. I go through my morning routine on autopilot, coffee, breakfast, uniform. But as I step outside and breathe in the cool morning air, I'm struck by a sudden realization. Yes, the world can be a dark and terrifying place. Yes, there are monsters hiding in plain sight. But there are also people like Eddie and me, ordinary people just doing our jobs, who sometimes stumble upon the extraordinary. People who, through simple acts of attention and duty, can help bring light to the darkness. I climb into my truck, the familiar rumble of the engine oddly comforting. As I pull away from the curb, I find myself scanning the street with new eyes, not just looking for bins to empty, but for anything out of place, anything that might hint at hidden dangers or hidden truths. Because that's the thing about garbage men. We see the city in a way no one else does. We're there in the quiet hours, witnessing the aftermath of people's lives, their secrets thrown away with the weekly trash. And sometimes, just sometimes, we might be the ones to uncover the truth that others have tried to bury. The route stretches out before me, familiar yet somehow new. I take a deep breath and put the truck in gear. Whatever the day might bring, whatever secrets might be hiding in the dumpsters and trash cans of this city, I'll be there to face it. After all, the garbage doesn't stop. And neither do I. Story 10. The first time I noticed the car, I brushed it off as coincidence. By the third time, I knew I was being followed. What I didn't know was that this seemingly ordinary food delivery shift would turn into the most terrifying night of my life. My name's Alex, and I've been working as a bicycle courier for Eats Now for about 6 months. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps me in shape. Plus, I've always enjoyed the freedom of cycling through the city, even if it means braving traffic and unpredictable weather. This particular Friday night started like any other. I'd been making deliveries since 5 p.m., crisscrossing the downtown area with bags of Thai food, burritos, and the occasional pint of ice cream. The weather was perfect, warm with a slight breeze, and I was in a groove, hitting my targets and racking up decent tips. It was around 9:30 when I first spotted the car. I was waiting at a red light, balancing a pizza box on my handlebars, when a dark sedan pulled up beside me. Nothing unusual about that, except the driver was staring at me with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably. As soon as the light changed, I pedaled off, glad to put some distance between us. 2 deliveries later, I saw the same car again. This time, it was parked across the street from the sushi place where I was picking up an order. The windows were tinted, but I could have sworn I saw movement inside as I walked past. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. This was a busy part of town on a Friday night. plenty of dark sedans around. I was probably just being paranoid. But then it happened again, and again. Over the next hour, I spotted the car 5 more times, always just on the periphery of wherever I was making a delivery. It never got too close, but it was always there, like a shadow I couldn't shake. By now, my heart was racing, and it had nothing to do with the exertion of cycling. I pulled into an alley, leaning my bike against the wall as I tried to catch my breath and think. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I pulled up the Eats Now app. I had 2 more deliveries in my queue, one to an apartment complex about 10 blocks north, and another to a house in the suburbs, a good 5 miles out. Part of me wanted to call it quits, log off, and head home. But I needed the money, and besides, what would I tell my roommate? Sorry, I think I'm being stalked by a mysterious car. It sounded ridiculous even in my head. Taking a deep breath, I made a decision. I'd do the apartment delivery. It was in a busy area with plenty of people around. Then I'd reassess. If I was still feeling uneasy, I'd cancel the last order and call it a night. With shaky determination, I got back on my bike and headed north. I kept my eyes peeled for the sedan, but for once it was nowhere to be seen. By the time I reached the apartment complex, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. I locked up my bike and headed inside, taking the elevator to the 14th floor. As I walked down the hallway, fishing the food out of my delivery bag, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Just one more delivery after this, and I could go home and forget all about this weird night. I knocked on the door of apartment 1407, plastering on my best friendly delivery person smile. There was a long pause, then the sound of locks being undone. The door opened a crack, and a man's voice called out, "Just leave it by the door, thanks." I frowned. This wasn't unusual. Some customers preferred no-contact deliveries, but something about the voice set me on edge. It sounded strained, almost frightened. "Sir," I called back, "are you all right in there?" Another pause, longer this time, then so quietly I almost missed it. "Please, help me." My blood ran cold. I took a step closer to the door, my mind racing. What was going on here? Should I call the police? What if I was misunderstanding the situation? Before I could decide what to do, I heard a commotion inside the apartment. A crash, a muffled shout, then the sound of running footsteps. The door was yanked open and a man burst out, nearly bowling me over in his haste. He was middle-aged, balding, wearing a rumpled business suit. His eyes were wide with terror, and there was a smear of blood on his collar. "Run!" he gasped, grabbing my arm. "They're coming!" I stood frozen for a split second, shock and confusion warring in my mind. Then I heard more footsteps from inside the apartment, heavy and purposeful. Instinct took over. I dropped the food and ran, the man from the apartment right behind me. We sprinted for the elevator, but the numbers were climbing. Someone was coming up. "Stairs!" I yelled, veering left toward the fire exit. We burst through the door and started down, taking the steps 2 and 3 at a time. Behind us, I heard the stairwell door slam open again. Our pursuers were gaining. My legs were burning by the time we reached the ground floor, but adrenaline kept me going. We exploded out of the fire exit into the alley behind the building, gasping for air. "My bike!" I panted, pointing. We can..." But the man was already running in the opposite direction toward the street. I hesitated for a split second, then followed him. The bike was fast, but it would only carry one of us. As we reached the sidewalk, a familiar dark sedan screeched to a halt in front of us. The back door flew open. "Get in!" a voice commanded. The man from the apartment didn't hesitate. He dove into the car, then turned back to me, his eyes pleading. "Come on!" Every instinct screamed that this was a terrible idea, but I could hear our pursuers getting closer, and I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. With a silent prayer, I jumped into the car. The door had barely closed behind me when the driver floored it. We shot forward, tires squealing as we merged into traffic. I twisted in my seat, catching a glimpse of 2 men in dark suits emerging from the alley, frustration evident on their faces, even from a distance. As the adrenaline began to ebb, the full weight of what had just happened hit me. I turned to the man from the apartment who was slumped in the seat beside me, his breathing ragged. What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "Who are you? Who are those men?" The man raised his head, his expression a mix of exhaustion and grim determination. "My name is Daniel Reeves," he said. I was an accountant for Meridian Global Enterprises, and those men back there, they were sent to kill me." My mouth went dry. "Kill you? Why?" Daniel ran a shaky hand through his thinning hair. "Because I know things. Things that could bring down some very powerful people. I've been gathering evidence of fraud, money laundering, connections to organized crime, and when they found out, they decided to silence me." I felt like I'd stumbled into some kind of bizarre movie plot. This couldn't be real. And yet the fear in Daniel's eyes was all too genuine. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process this information. "But who are these people? The ones who helped us escape?" A new voice answered, the driver, a woman with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes. She met my gaze in the rearview mirror. "We're the good guys, kid, or at least we're trying to be. Name's Marlene. My partner Frank is riding shotgun." Frank, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, turned in his seat to face us. "We're ex-FBI," he explained. "Now we work independently, helping people like Daniel here expose corruption. We've been trying to get to him for days, but Meridian's goons had him under constant surveillance." My head was spinning. FBI agents, corporate conspiracies. This morning, my biggest concern had been making enough in tips to cover my phone bill. Now I was in the middle of what felt like a Tom Clancy novel. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice smaller than I would have liked. Marlene's eyes flicked back to the road. "Now we get Daniel somewhere safe. We've got a safe house about an hour outside the city. Once we're there, we can figure out our next move." I nodded, then froze as a thought struck me. "Wait, my bike, my phone, they're still back at the apartment building. If those men find them, they'll be able to identify you," Frank finished grimly. "Don't worry, we'll take care of it. But I'm afraid you might be in this for the long haul now, kid. Hope you didn't have any big plans this weekend." I let out a slightly hysterical laugh. My plans had involved binge-watching Netflix and maybe doing laundry if I felt ambitious. Now I was on the run from corporate assassins. As the city lights faded behind us and we merged onto the highway, I found myself wondering how my life had changed so drastically in the span of a few hours. One thing was certain, this was going to be a delivery story like no other. I just hoped I'd live long enough to tell it. Story 11. The first sign of trouble was the nail in my tire. The second was the helpful mechanic who appeared out of nowhere on this desolate stretch of road. But it wasn't until I saw the blood on his hands that I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. It had been a long day of driving, and I was eager to reach my destination before nightfall. The sun was already dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. I'd been on this rural road for hours, surrounded by nothing but fields and the occasional cluster of trees. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't pure static, when I heard it. A loud pop followed by the unmistakable sound of a flat tire. Cursing under my breath, I eased the car onto the shoulder and got out to assess the damage. Sure enough, the front passenger side tire was completely flat. I opened the trunk, hoping against hope that I'd remembered to check the spare before this trip. No such luck. The spare was flat too. I leaned against the car, weighing my options. My cell phone showed no service, and I hadn't seen another vehicle in at least an hour. Just as I was considering the long walk ahead of me, I saw a truck approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me as the truck slowed and pulled up behind my car. A man stepped out, mid-40s I guessed, with a weathered face and calloused hands that spoke of a life of manual labor. "Car trouble," he called out, walking towards me with a friendly smile. I nodded, returning his smile. "Flat tire and my spare's no good. Don't suppose you know of a garage nearby?" He chuckled. "Well, you're in luck. I'm a mechanic. Name's Tom. Let's take a look at that tire of yours." I watched as Tom knelt by the flat tire, his experienced hands quickly finding the source of the problem, a large nail embedded in the rubber. "Nasty piece of work," he muttered. "But I think I can patch it up enough to get you to the next town. Got a repair kit in my truck." As he stood up, I noticed something odd. There was a dark stain on his hands, too dark to be grease or oil. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what it looked like. Blood. Tom must have seen me staring because he quickly wiped his hands on his jeans. "Just a little grease," he said with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hazard of the job, you know." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, thanks so much for your help." As Tom went back to his truck to get the repair kit, I tried to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it really was just grease. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild after too many hours on the road, but then I saw it, a cell phone lying in the grass near my car. It must have fallen out when I first got out to check the tire. I picked it up intending to put it back in the car when the screen lit up with a new message. "Help me, he's coming back. Call 911. My blood ran cold. I looked up to see Tom walking back towards me, repair kit in hand and a smile on his face that now seemed more predatory than friendly. "Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the phone in my hand. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I needed to play this cool, to not let on that I suspected anything. "Yeah, just found my phone. Must have dropped it earlier." Tom nodded, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew, somehow he knew this wasn't my phone. "Well, let's get that tire fixed up," he said, kneeling down beside the car. I stood there, frozen in indecision. Should I confront him, try to run? The nearest town was miles away, and I'd never outrun his truck. As if reading my thoughts, Tom spoke without looking up from the tire. "You know, it's dangerous for a woman to be out here alone, all sorts of bad people around these parts." The threat in his words was unmistakable. I clutched the phone tighter, my palms sweaty. "I appreciate your help," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "But I think I'll just call for a tow truck. Wouldn't want to trouble you any further." Tom stood up slowly, his eyes hard. "Now, why would you want to do that when I'm already here? Unless—" he took a step towards me. "Unless you're thinking of doing something stupid." I backed away, my heart pounding. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me go and we can forget this ever happened." He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, you know too much now, but don't worry, it'll be over quick. Just like it was for the owner of that phone you're holding." As he lunged towards me, I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the phone at his face with all my might. It caught him off guard, hitting him squarely in the forehead. He stumbled back, momentarily stunned. I seized the opportunity and ran, not towards the road, but into the field beside it. I heard Tom cursing behind me, followed by the sound of his heavy footsteps. The tall grass whipped at my face and arms as I ran, my lungs burning with each breath. I could hear Tom getting closer, his longer stride eating up the distance between us. Just as I felt his hand grasp at my shirt, I saw it. An old, dilapidated barn half hidden by a cluster of trees. With a burst of desperate energy, I changed course, sprinting towards the structure. I reached the barn just steps ahead of Tom, slamming the door shut behind me. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls, I saw a rusty shovel leaning against a stack of moldy hay bales. I grabbed it, holding it out in front of me like a weapon. The door burst open and Tom stood there, silhouetted against the fading daylight. His face was a mask of rage, a trickle of blood running down his forehead where the phone had struck him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he growled, stepping into the barn. I backed away, the shovel shaking in my grasp. "Stay back, I've called the police. They're on their way right now." He laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Nice try, but we both know there's no cell service out here. It's just you and me." As he moved closer, I swung the shovel with all my might. It connected with his shoulder, causing him to stumble back with a grunt of pain. But before I could swing again, he rushed forward, tackling me to the ground. The shovel clattered away as we struggled. Tom was stronger, his weight pinning me down as his hands closed around my throat. Spots danced in my vision as I fought for air, clawing at his face and arms. Just as I thought it was over, my hand closed around something solid in the hay beside me. Without thinking, I swung it at Tom's head. There was a sickening crack, and suddenly the pressure on my throat was gone. I scrambled away, gasping for air, to see Tom lying motionless on the barn floor. Beside him was a piece of old farm equipment, the thing I'd struck him with. For a moment I just sat there, shaking and trying to process what had just happened. Then I heard it, the distant sound of sirens. I stumbled out of the barn on unsteady legs. In the fading light, I could see flashing lights approaching on the road. Someone must have seen something, called for help. As the police cars pulled up, I sank to my knees in relief. It was over. I was safe. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and paramedic checkups. They found Tom's truck, and with it, evidence of his other victims. The phone I'd found belonged to his latest victim, a young woman he'd kidnapped just hours before I encountered him. Thanks to the message she'd managed to send, they found her alive, bound and gagged in a hidden compartment in Tom's truck. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket around my shoulders, a detective approached me. "You're one lucky lady," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "If you hadn't found that phone—" I nodded, still too shaken to speak much. Lucky wasn't exactly how I felt, but I knew he was right. If not for a series of seemingly random events, the flat tire, the dropped phone, I might have become just another victim. As the ambulance prepared to take me to the hospital for a more thorough checkup, I couldn't help but think about how quickly an ordinary day had turned into a nightmare, and how sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones we imagine lurking in the dark, but the ones who offer a helping hand in broad daylight. I knew the road ahead would be long, dealing with the trauma, the police investigation, the inevitable nightmares, but I was alive. I had survived. And that, I realized, was the first step on the journey to recovery. As we drove away, leaving behind the lonely stretch of road that had nearly been my undoing, I made a silent promise to myself. I would heal, I would grow stronger, and I would never ever ignore my instincts again. Story 12. They say if you want to hide something, put it in plain sight. But when you're carrying a package worth millions through the bustling streets of the city, being invisible is your only hope for survival. The weight of the small package in my courier bag feels disproportionate to its size. I adjust the strap across my chest, the leather of my riding jacket creaking as I lean into a turn. The afternoon sun glints off the skyscrapers surrounding me, momentarily blinding me as I weave through traffic. I'm Ali, 28 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been a motorcycle courier for a company that prides itself on discretion and speed. Usually that means legal documents or last-minute deliveries for forgetful executives. Today it means something else entirely. The job came in this morning, marked urgent and high priority. The client, a man in an expensive suit with a nervous twitch, handed me a small, heavily padded envelope. "Get this to the address inside in the next 2 hours," he said, his eyes darting around the lobby of his office building. "There's a substantial bonus if you make it on time and undisturbed." I didn't ask questions. In this line of work, curiosity is a liability. But as I merged onto the highway, the importance of my cargo became clear. A black sedan pulled up beside me, the driver's eyes locked on my courier bag. When I accelerated, so did he. Now, an hour into my journey, that same sedan is still on my tail. It's been joined by another, a sleek sports car that's been shadowing me for the past 20 minutes. They're good, keeping their distance, never making any overtly aggressive moves. But their intent is clear. They want what I'm carrying. I take a sharp right, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic. Horns blare as I squeeze between cars, my heart pounding in sync with the thrum of my bike's engine. In my mirrors, I see the sedan get caught behind a delivery truck, but the sports car manages to follow. My mind races as fast as my motorcycle. Who are these people? What's in the package that's worth this kind of pursuit? For a moment, I consider pulling over, handing it over. But I've built my reputation on reliability. Plus, something tells me these aren't the type to let witnesses walk away. I spot an alleyway coming up on my left and make a split-second decision. Leaning hard, I cut across the oncoming lane, ignoring the screeching tires and angry shouts. The alley is narrow, barely wide enough for my bike. Trash cans and discarded boxes become a slalom course as I navigate the tight space. Emerging on the other side, I'm greeted by the cacophony of a street market. Vendors hawk their wares as pedestrians mill about, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. I slow down, trying to blend in, to become just another delivery driver making their rounds. For a moment, I think I've lost them. Then I spot the sports car crawling through the crowd a block behind me. The driver's eyes meet mine through the windshield, and I see a flash of triumph in them. He thinks he's got me cornered. But I grew up in these streets. I know every shortcut, every hidden passage. I gun the engine, startling a group of tourists, and aim for a narrow gap between 2 buildings. It's a service road, rarely used except by delivery trucks. The surface is uneven, littered with potholes, but it's my best shot at losing my pursuers. As I emerge onto a main street, I allow myself a small smile. Surely I've lost them now. But my relief is short-lived. The black sedan comes barreling out of a side street, cutting me off. I swerve hard to avoid it, nearly laying the bike down. My heart is in my throat as I right myself. My knees barely an inch from the asphalt. Now they're not even trying to be subtle. The sedan accelerates, trying to force me into oncoming traffic. The sports car appears behind me, boxing me in. I'm running out of options and time. That's when I see it, a construction site up ahead. The road narrows to a single lane with concrete barriers on either side. It's risky, but it might be my only chance. I downshift and accelerate hard, the bike's engine screaming in protest. The gap between the barriers looms ahead, looking impossibly narrow. Behind me, I hear the screech of brakes as my pursuers realize what I'm about to do. Time seems to slow down as I approach the barricades. I lean the bike as far as I dare, feeling my knee slider scrape against the concrete. For a heart-stopping moment, I'm sure I've miscalculated, that I'm about to become a smear on the barrier. Then I'm through, the bike fishtailing as I straighten up. In my mirrors, I see the sedan attempt to follow, only to wedge itself between the barriers with a sickening crunch of metal. But I can't celebrate yet. The sports car is still behind me, having found another way around the construction. Its engine roars as it closes the distance between us. I weave through traffic, pushing my bike to its limits. Every maneuver is a calculated risk, threading the needle between cars, running red lights, even jumping a curb to cut through a park. My pursuer matches me move for move, never more than a few car lengths behind. As I round a corner, I feel the bike's rear tire lose traction. I'm going too fast, leaning too hard. Time slows down as I feel myself starting to slide. This is it, I think. This is how it ends, but years of riding experience kick in. I ease off the throttle, straighten up slightly, and somehow manage to save it. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. I chance a glance in my mirror and my blood runs cold. The sports car is right behind me, close enough that I can see the driver's face twisted in a determined grimace. He's going to ram me. In that moment, everything becomes crystal clear. I remember a detail from the package's delivery instructions, a specific time and a specific place. I glance at my watch, 5 minutes to go. I make a hard right, then an immediate left, entering a series of narrow one-way streets. The sports car falls behind, unable to match my bike's agility in the tight turns. But I know it's not far behind. As I emerge onto a wider street, I see my destination up ahead, a nondescript office building with mirrored windows. A man in a suit stands on the steps, checking his watch anxiously. I pull up to the curb, my tires screeching in protest. The man's eyes widen as he takes in my disheveled appearance and the sound of squealing tires approaching from behind. "The package," I gasp, fumbling with the zipper on my courier bag. "It's for you, right?" He nods, reaching out with trembling hands. As I pass him the padded envelope, I hear the sports car round the corner behind me. The man tears open the package, pulls out what looks like a small flash drive, and immediately turns to rush into the building. As the glass doors close behind him, I see a group of serious-looking men in suits converging on him. I turn back to face my pursuer, expecting to find myself staring down the barrel of a gun. But to my surprise, the sports car is gone. It's as if it vanished into thin air. For a long moment, I sit there on my idling bike, trying to process what just happened. My hands are shaking as the adrenaline starts to wear off. Pedestrians walk by, giving me odd looks, completely unaware of the high-stakes drama that just played out on their streets. As my breathing starts to return to normal, I feel my phone vibrate. It's a message from my dispatcher. "Package delivered successfully. Client extremely satisfied. Bonus has been transferred to your account." I let out a shaky laugh. Just another day in the life of a motorcycle courier, right? As I kick my bike into gear and pull away from the curb, I can't help but wonder about the contents of that package. What was on that flash drive that was worth all this? Corporate secrets? Government intel? But then I shake my head, banishing the thoughts. In this job, the less you know, the better. All that matters is that I delivered the package on time and in one piece. As I merge back into traffic, heading towards my next pickup, I can't help but smile. Let the suits and the spies play their high-stakes games. Me? I'm just the guy who makes sure their secrets get where they need to go. And as long as the city keeps its secrets, I'll keep riding. Story 13. The scratches on the shower wall looked like desperate pleas for help. And as the lights flickered out, I realized they might soon be mine too. What should have been a quick pit stop on a long haul had turned into a trucker's worst nightmare, and I was living it. My name's Mike, and I've been driving big rigs cross-country for the better part of 2 decades. You get used to a certain routine on the road, the endless miles of highway, the blur of truck stops and diners, the solitude of the cab. but nothing in all those years could have prepared me for what happened that night at the Lone Star Truck Haven. I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, pushing the limits of what was legal and probably safe to make a deadline. My eyes were gritty with fatigue and my back felt like it was fused to the seat. When I saw the sign for the truck stop looming out of the darkness, it was like an oasis in the desert. The Lone Star was one of those 24-hour places you find dotted along the major trucking routes, part gas station, part diner, part motel for weary drivers. I'd stopped there a handful of times over the years, never for more than a quick meal or a fill-up. But tonight, the promise of a hot shower and maybe a couple hours of sleep in a real bed was too tempting to pass up. I pulled my rig into one of the oversized parking spots, the brakes hissing as I set them. The lot was about half full, not unusual for this time of night. As I climbed down from the cab, I noticed how quiet it was. No rumble of idling engines, no chatter from the handful of other drivers milling around. Just an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Shaking off the feeling, I grabbed my duffel bag and headed for the main building. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over everything. At the counter, a bored-looking clerk barely glanced up from his phone as I paid for a shower token and a room key. "Shower's down the hall to the left," he mumbled, sliding the token and key across the counter. "Room 13's at the end of the building. Checkout's at 11. I nodded my thanks and headed down the dingy hallway, my boots echoing on the linoleum floor. The shower room was empty when I pushed open the door, the harsh light reflecting off white tiles. It wasn't exactly five-star accommodations, but after hours in the cab, it looked like heaven. I hung my towel on the hook outside one of the stalls and stepped inside, drawing the plastic curtain closed behind me. As I waited for the water to heat up, I noticed something odd on the tiled wall. A series of deep scratches, too deliberate to be accidental damage. Leaning closer, I realized they formed words. "Get out while you can." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold tile under my feet. It was probably just some bored kid's idea of a prank, I told myself. Or maybe another driver gone a little stir-crazy from too many hours on the road. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. Trying to put it out of my mind, I stepped under the spray of hot water, letting it wash away the grime and tension of the long drive. For a few minutes, I almost managed to relax. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely, plunging me into total darkness. I froze, water still cascading over me, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. In the pitch black, every other sense seemed heightened. I could hear water dripping from the shower head, the hum of pipes in the walls, and something else, a soft scratching sound, like nails on tile. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. "Is anyone there?" No response, but the scratching got louder, closer. I fumbled for the faucet, shutting off the water. As I reached for where I thought I'd left my towel, my hand met empty air. Panic started to set in. I was naked, blind, and something was in here with me. I backed up against the cold tile wall, desperately trying to remember the layout of the room where the door was. The scratching was right outside the shower stall now. I held my breath, straining to hear any other sound. For a long moment, there was nothing but the thundering of my own pulse in my ears. Then a whisper, so close it could have been inside my own head. "You should have listened to the warning." I lost it. With a yell that was equal parts terror and defiance, I lunged forward, shoving the shower curtain aside. I collided with something, someone solid and cold. We both went down in a tangle of limbs sliding across the wet floor. I fought wildly, all technique forgotten in my desperation. My fist connected with something that felt like a face, and I heard a grunt of pain. Scrambling to my feet, I ran for where I thought the door should be, hands outstretched. My palm slammed into the door just as the lights flickered back to life. I whirled around, back pressed against the wood, ready to face my attacker, but the room was empty. No sign of a struggle, no mysterious figure, just me, naked and dripping, chest heaving as I gulped in air. The shower was still running in the stall I'd been using. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I so exhausted that I was hallucinating? On shaky legs, I made my way back to the shower stall. My towel was hanging right where I'd left it. I grabbed it, wrapping it around my waist like armor. That's when I saw it. Next to the warning scratched into the tile, there was a new message. The grooves were still wet, glistening in the harsh light. Too late now. My blood ran cold. This was real. Whatever was happening here, whatever I'd encountered in the dark, it wasn't a product of an overworked imagination. I dressed in record time, not even bothering to dry off properly. My only thought was getting out of this place, getting back to my truck, and putting as many miles between me and the Lone Star as possible. As I hurried down the hallway, I passed the front desk. The clerk was gone, the counter deserted. Outside, the parking lot was eerily empty. Where had all the other trucks gone? I broke into a run, fumbling for my keys as I approached my rig. Just as I reached for the door handle, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, fist already swinging, but the blow never landed. Standing before me was the clerk from the front desk, but he looked different. His eyes were too wide, his smile too sharp. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice a low rasp that bore little resemblance to the bored mumble from earlier. "But you haven't even seen the best part of our little establishment." I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "What are you—" The thing wearing the clerk's face laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "We are the keepers of the lost, the shepherds of the damned. And you, my friend, have just checked in for an extended stay." As he spoke, I became aware of movement all around us. Shadows detaching themselves from the darkness, taking on vaguely human shapes. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, closing in on us from all sides. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of the warning scratched into the shower wall. This place, this Lone Star Truck Haven, was a trap, and I had walked right into it. With a surge of desperate strength, I wrenched free from the creature's grasp. I yanked open the truck door and hauled myself into the cab, slamming and locking it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into gear, not even bothering to release the brake properly. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing. In the rearview mirror, I could see the crowd of shadows swarming towards me, led by the thing that used to be the clerk. I stomped on the accelerator, crashing through the exit and onto the highway. For miles, I drove like a man possessed, expecting at any moment to see those unnatural shapes appear in my mirrors. But gradually, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and lingering terror. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I pulled over at a rest stop, a real one this time, with other trucks and normal tired-looking people. My hands were still shaking as I pulled out my phone to call my dispatcher. I knew I'd have to come up with some explanation for why I was hours off schedule and halfway across the state from where I should be. But how could I possibly explain what had really happened? As I dialed the number, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. There, just visible above the collar of my shirt, were 4 parallel scratches, as if someone or something had tried to grab me and hold on. I realized then that I would never be able to forget what happened at the Lone Star Truck Haven. And I knew with chilling certainty that somewhere out there in the vastness of the American highway system, it was waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. All I could do was hope that they would heed the warning I hadn't and get out while they still could. Story 14. The last ride of the night. That's what I told myself as I accepted the fare, not knowing those words would take on a chilling new meaning. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight, but this final passenger would make me question everything I thought I knew about my job, my city, and the thin line between sanity and madness. It was just past 2 a.m., and the streets of downtown were finally starting to empty. The usual mix of partygoers and night owls had thinned out, leaving behind a quiet that always felt a little eerie after the chaos of a Saturday night. My phone pinged with a new ride request. The pickup location was just a few blocks away, outside one of those trendy speakeasies that had popped up all over the city in the last year. I swiped to accept, grateful for one last fare before calling it a night. I pulled up to the curb, scanning the sidewalk for my passenger. A figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby alleyway, moving towards my car with an odd, shuffling gait. As they got closer, I could make out more details. A man, probably in his 30s, wearing a rumpled suit that looked like it had seen better days. He slid into the back seat, and I got my first good look at him in the rearview mirror. His face was pale, almost gaunt. with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But it was his eyes themselves that caught my attention. They seemed to shine with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. There was a long pause before he spoke, his voice low and raspy. "Just drive." I hesitated. In my years as a rideshare driver, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming at me to end this ride before it began. But before I could say anything, the man spoke again. "Please, I'll pay double. I need to keep moving." Against my better judgment, I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The streets were nearly empty now, our headlights cutting through the darkness as we drove aimlessly through the city. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, unnerved by the way the man stared at me. His gaze never wavered, those unnaturally bright eyes fixed on my reflection. After about 10 minutes of silence, I decided to try and break the tension. "So, rough night?" I asked, aiming for a light tone. The man's response was immediate and chilling. "They're following me," he whispered, his eyes darting to the rear window. "They've been following me for days. I can't let them catch me." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Great, I thought. I've picked up a paranoid schizophrenic off his meds. I'd had similar passengers before, and while they were usually harmless, the situations could be unpredictable. "Who's following you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and neutral. He leaned forward, his face appearing between the front seats. "The shadows," he hissed. "They look like people, but they're not. There's something else." I suppressed a shudder at his proximity. "Right," I said, desperately wishing this ride was over. "Well, I'm sure you're safe now. Why don't we head to your home, or maybe a hospital?" "No," he shouted, causing me to jump. "We can't stop. They'll find me if we stop." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that engaging with his delusions wouldn't help. Okay, I said soothingly. We'll keep driving for now." We continued in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional ping of my phone as I declined other ride requests. I didn't feel comfortable picking up anyone else with this guy in the car. As we drove through a residential area, the man suddenly grabbed my shoulder. "Turn here," he commanded. Startled, I reflexively made the turn onto a narrow side street. "Listen," I said, my patience wearing thin, "I need you to calm down and give me an actual destination. I can't just drive around all night." But the man wasn't listening. He was staring out the rear window, his body tense. "They're getting closer," he muttered. "We need to go faster." I glanced in my mirrors but saw nothing except empty streets. "There's no one there," I said firmly. "You're safe. Now please, tell me where you want to go." His hand tightened on my shoulder, his fingers digging in painfully. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "They're everywhere. In the shadows, in the reflections. They wear human faces, but they're not human. And they want me." A chill ran down my spine despite my skepticism. There was something in his voice, a raw terror that felt too real to be entirely delusional. "Okay," I said, trying to think of a way out of this situation. "Why don't we go to the police station? They can help." "No," he screamed, lunging forward. "The police are part of it. They're all part of it." In his agitation, he grabbed the steering wheel, jerking it sharply to the right. The car swerved, tires squealing as I fought for control. "Stop it!" I yelled, fear and anger finally overtaking my attempt at calm. "You're going to get us killed!" He let go of the wheel, shrinking back into his seat. "I'm sorry," he whimpered. "I'm sorry, but we're not going to my house. Keep driving." My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This had gone too far. I needed to end this ride now before things got any worse. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Listen," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. "I understand you're scared, but I can't keep driving aimlessly. We need to go somewhere specific or I'm going to have to end this ride." There was a long pause. When the man spoke again, his voice was different, calmer, almost resigned. "You're right," he said softly. "I'm sorry, I haven't been myself lately." Relief washed over me. Maybe we could end this peacefully after all. "It's okay," I said. "Where would you like to go?" "There's a motel," he said, "on the outskirts of town, the Pinewood. Do you know it?" I nodded. I knew the place, a rundown establishment that had seen better days. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. As we drove towards the motel, the man grew quieter. His manic energy seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a heavy silence that was almost worse. We were about halfway there when he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not crazy, you know." I didn't respond, keeping my eyes on the road. "I know how it sounds," he continued, "but I've seen things that shouldn't be possible, and once you see them, they see you too." I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. The man was staring out the window, his face reflected in the glass. For a moment, just a fleeting second, I could have sworn I saw something else in that reflection, a face that wasn't his, wasn't human. I blinked and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. The product of too many hours on the road and a wild story. We pulled into the motel parking lot, the neon sign flickering weakly in the pre-dawn darkness. "We're here," I said, relief evident in my voice. The man didn't move. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For listening, for not judging." I turned to look at him, ready to say something reassuring, but the words died in my throat. The back seat was empty. I stared, uncomprehending. There was no way he could have gotten out without me noticing. The child locks were on. I always kept them engaged for safety. With shaking hands, I got out of the car, looking around the empty parking lot. There was no sign of my passenger. As I stood there trying to make sense of what had happened, I noticed something on the back seat. A business card, plain white with black text. I picked it up, reading the words by the dim light of the motel sign. "When you're ready to see the truth, call this number. But remember, once you see, you can't unsee." Below was a phone number and a single word, Vigil. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that card. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to forget this night had ever happened. To go back to my normal life, where the shadows were just shadows and the monsters existed only in stories. But as I got back into my car, I slipped the card into my wallet. Because deep down, in a part of myself I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew I'd be calling that number someday. After all, once you glimpse the truth, how can you ever go back to not knowing? I drove home as the first light of dawn broke over the city, the events of the night replaying in my mind. It had been the last ride of the night, all right, and possibly the last ride of my old life. Because now, every time I look in my rearview mirror, I can't help but wonder, what's really looking back? Story 15. They say the darkest hour is just before dawn. But on this midnight bus ride, I learned that true darkness has nothing to do with the time of day. The fluorescent lights of the bus station flicker as I step aboard the last bus of the night. It's 11:55 p.m., and I'm headed home after a late shift at the diner. The air inside the bus is stale, tinged with the faint scent of diesel and something I can't quite place. I nod to the driver as I swipe my pass. He doesn't acknowledge me, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. There's something off about his posture, too rigid, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. But it's been a long night, and I'm too tired to give it much thought. The bus is nearly empty. An elderly woman dozes near the front, her shopping bags clutched tightly to her chest. A teenager with headphones sits in the middle, bobbing his head to an inaudible beat. At the back, a man in a rumpled suit stares out the window, his briefcase balanced on his knees. I choose a seat about halfway down, settling in for the 45-minute ride home. As the bus pulls away from the curb, I lean my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. We're about 10 minutes into the journey when I first notice something's not right. The familiar buildings of downtown are receding, replaced by industrial warehouses I don't recognize. I frown, checking my phone's map. We should be heading east, but we're going north. I stand up, making my way to the front of the bus. "Excuse me," I call out to the driver. "I think we might have taken a wrong turn." He doesn't respond, doesn't even blink. "Sir?" I try again, louder this time. Still nothing. A chill runs down my spine as I realize the other passengers haven't reacted either. The old woman is still sleeping, the teenager still bobbing his head, the businessman still staring out the window. I return to my seat, my heart racing. This has to be a mistake, right? Maybe there's construction on the usual route. Maybe the driver's just filling in and doesn't know the way. But deep down, I know these are just excuses. Something is very, very wrong. I pull out my phone, intending to call for help, but there's no signal, of course. I glance out the window again, trying to spot a street sign, anything that might tell me where we are. But all I see are abandoned buildings and empty lots. The bus takes another turn, and suddenly we're on a narrow road flanked by dense forest. This definitely isn't the way home. Panic begins to set in as I realize we're getting farther and farther from the city, from help. I stand up again, this time moving towards the other passengers. "Excuse me," I say to the teenager, tapping him on the shoulder. He doesn't respond. I wave my hand in front of his face. Nothing. It's like he's frozen in place, a lifelike mannequin rather than a living, breathing person. My breath comes in short gasps as I stumble to the back of the bus. The businessman is equally unresponsive, his eyes glassy and unfocused. The old woman hasn't moved an inch since we left the station. This can't be happening. I pinch myself hard, hoping to wake up from this nightmare. But the pain is real, sharp, and immediate. This is really happening. I rush back to the front of the bus, my fear giving way to desperation. "Stop the bus!" I shout at the driver. "Let me off right now!" For the first time, he moves, his head turning slowly to face me. His eyes meet mine, and I stumble backward, a scream caught in my throat. His eyes are completely black, no whites, no irises, just endless, bottomless darkness. He smiles, revealing teeth that are too sharp, too numerous to be human. When he speaks, his voice is like gravel being crushed. "Sit down," he says. We're almost there. I scramble back to my seat, my mind reeling. This isn't possible. Things like this don't happen in real life. But as I look out the window at the unfamiliar landscape rushing by, I know that whatever rules I thought governed reality no longer apply. The forest outside grows denser, the trees pressing in on either side of the road. Their branches scrape against the sides of the bus, a cacophony of screeches that sounds almost hungry. I close my eyes, trying to slow my breathing, to think. There has to be a way out of this, the emergency exit. Of course. I look around, spotting the red handle a few rows back. Moving as quietly as I can, I make my way towards it. Just as my fingers brush the handle, I hear that gravelly voice again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I freeze, turning slowly to face the front of the bus. The driver is still facing forward, but I can see his grotesque smile reflected in the rearview mirror. "The things out there," he continues, "are far worse than anything in here." As if on cue, something slams into the side of the bus, rocking it violently. I'm thrown off balance, falling into a seat. Outside the window, I catch a glimpse of something massive and dark moving through the trees. "What do you want?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The driver chuckles, a sound like bones grinding together. "It's not about what I want. It's about where you're going, where you all are going." I look around at the other passengers, still frozen in their poses. Are they aware? Can they see and hear everything that's happening? The thought is almost worse than if they were simply unconscious. The bus begins to slow, and I realize we're approaching a clearing in the forest. In the center stands a building, if you can call it that. It's a massive structure, its architecture defying logic and physics. Parts of it seem to shift and move even as I watch. "Welcome home," the driver says as the bus comes to a stop. Home? This place is as far from home as I can imagine, but as I stare at the building, I feel a strange pull like a hook behind my navel drawing me towards it. The doors of the bus open with a hiss. The other passengers stand in unison, their movements jerky and unnatural. They file out, marching towards the building like automatons. I remain in my seat, gripping the edges so hard my knuckles turn white. The driver turns to face me again, his impossible smile wider than ever. "You can't fight it," he says. "Best to just accept it." But I can't. Won't. Whatever this place is, whatever's happening, I refuse to go quietly. With a surge of adrenaline, I leap up and rush towards the open door. I half expect the driver to grab me, to stop me, but he just watches, that terrible smile never leaving his face. I burst out of the bus, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. The other passengers are already halfway to the building, their forms beginning to blur and distort as they approach. I run in the opposite direction, towards the forest. Behind me, I hear the driver's laughter, a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The trees loom before me, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. But anything is better than that building, than the fate that awaits inside. As I plunge into the forest, the world around me begins to shift. The trees twist into impossible shapes. the ground beneath my feet becoming spongy and unstable. It's like running through a dream or a nightmare. I don't know how long I run. Time seems to lose all meaning in this place, but eventually, I burst out of the forest and find myself at a bus stop. It's my bus stop, the one near my apartment. The streetlights are on, a few early morning commuters waiting quietly for the first bus of the day. I collapse onto the bench, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The other people glance at me curiously but quickly return to their phones or newspapers. As my heartbeat begins to slow, I start to doubt myself. Was it all a dream? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But then I feel something in my pocket. I reach in and pull out a ticket stub I don't remember having before. On it, in flowing script that seems to move as I watch, are the words, "Round trip." I crumple the ticket in my fist, fighting back a hysterical laugh. Whatever happened last night, whatever that place was, I have a feeling it's not over. That someday, somehow, I'll find myself on that midnight bus again. But next time, I'll be ready. As the morning bus pulls up, looking blessedly normal, I stand on shaky legs. I have a choice to make. Do I get on, trusting that this bus will take me where it's supposed to go? Or do I walk, never trusting public transportation again? In the end, I climb aboard. Because if there's one thing I learned last night, it's that sometimes the journey is inevitable. All we can do is face it head on and hope we're strong enough to make it through to the other side. The bus pulls away from the curb and I watch the city wake up around me. For now, at least, I'm home. But as the ticket in my pocket reminds me, this might just be an intermission in a much longer, stranger journey.